Hi, I'm Todd Downing ACE, editor of Mrs. America, and you're listening to The Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I am a director and owner of BC Media Productions. And this is The Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. So on today's episode of Go Creative Show, we have a great discussion with the editor of Mrs. America, Todd Downing. We talk a lot about editing, obviously, because he's the editor of the show. But what we really talk about is how you tell a story through editing, which is a valuable lesson for everybody out there, whether you're an editor or not. Todd does a really good job of explaining his work on Mrs. America, and especially those episodes that have some really unique editing choices, and we get into a lot of those. If you guys watch the series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the series is so good. It's on FX. The entire series is available now, and you guys certainly should be watching it. Todd Downing, editor of Mrs. America, coming up in just a couple of minutes. All right, we've got so much to dive into, so let's get to it. With the editor of Mrs. America and so much more, Todd Downing. So I'm here with Todd Downing, ACE. I'm talking about his latest project, Mrs. America. Todd, thank you so much for being on Go Creative Show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So when you get handed this project, Mrs. America, it's an FX project, so you know it's going to be a little bit edgy. And it's got such an interesting topic that's so timely and so important. How do you react to this when it gets handed to you as a I guess a potential project at the beginning, and then eventually, how did you land the job?
Well, the timeliness was a huge attraction. Like when they approached me, I was like, oh, it was the perfect timing, because all the momentum for the ERA was coming back in a few states of it being passed again. Whether that will stick or not is another question, but it seems like it was in the air, and with the Me Too movement happening and everything, it just seemed like a really, and in a largely female cast, and even one episode there's no men at all in it except for background. It just seemed like, it was just original and timely, and it really, and then, Kate Blanchett and Sarah Paulson and Margot Martin and Tracy Ullman. Like,
I mean, it's like everyone.
Can't say no to that.
It's exactly. Well, how does it even work for editors? Like, we have a lot of cinematographers on the show. Oh, everything's falling apart over there, Todd.
I know. I'm not tech savvy. That's why I need my assistant editor here for this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how does it work for editors? Like, we talk to cinematographers a lot. And they always tell us that they'll create like a lookbook, and they'll give it to the director, and they'll sort of lobby for the job a little bit. How does it work with editors? How do you get these projects? I think sometimes I'll look at work that the person has done that I'm interviewing with. Maybe research that, something like Mrs. America, where it's based on history. You can do a bit of research of that too. I knew a bit about it. I grew up in Illinois. Downstate Illinois, like a couple hours away from Phyllis Schlafly. So I was kind of familiar with that type of Republican woman, that was around, even though I grew up in a very liberal town, like that kind of Republican woman was around. So it just felt a bit familiar to me, that kind of polite hate, like they're not going to say it out loud. So I guess with Mrs. America, I think I had a bit of knowledge about it already. I knew about Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, obviously, and all that. But you brush up a little bit before you talk to them. And, I didn't have to look, like I said, and again, the cast, I knew, it's just like, of course, you've seen stuff with all of them in it too. Well, so no, I understand that you want the job. Like, who wouldn't want this? But how do you, what is the process to landing these jobs? Like, cinematographers tell us they create lookbooks, they go to the director, they have to explain their vision for something. For an editor, what is that process like? Does an agent sort of get this job for you, or do you have to go and sort of pitch yourself to the directors or the production companies? How does it work?
They actually tracked me down because a couple of the execs really liked Russian Doll.
Yeah.
Which I edited the year before. So they came to me, which was great. It's kind of like, wow, this, doesn't really happen that often, but it was great that it did. And I guess it's not like making a lookbook or you talk about what you like. And when I met with Davi, the creator, it's like you just talk about what you like in editing and what styles of editing you like and what you think would be good for this. It's nothing that I'm like, oh, here's my plan and I'm going to go in and land this job. It's just, I think I'm just pretty honest about this is my taste and this is what I like to do. And then if it matches, great, you can get the job. But it's not like I have this bullet point things I have to tick off, you know what I mean? Or bring any sort of sample work or, you know what I mean? It's just, I think it's more just, this is me and this is what I like. And then do you jive or not? Because you spend a lot of time with them in the edit, you know what I mean? You kind of have to get along.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it is personality too. Like you need to, and I think that's probably the same for all crew members. You don't want to put together a crew with people that you can't stand. I mean, that's just not, it's not going to work. But there is an intimate connection between the editor and the creators of the show, the director. I mean, you're right there sitting next to them for hours and hours.
Yeah, you kind of become not this show, not so much, but I've had other shows where you're sort of their therapist at some point. Like they start telling you about, they're in there for so long and they start telling you their relationship problems or whatever. So, I think that's part of the job too, is listening, but it's fun.
How do you describe your I guess sensibilities with editing? You had mentioned before you're honest with them. You just kind of tell them, what are you into? What do you like? What's your style? How would you describe those things?
I think my big thing is not leaning on score a lot. I think that's when I don't like these shows or films that are scored wall to wall. It's just like the biggest turn off. It just makes me fall asleep. I just tune out. So I think for me is trying to get it to work without music. I always do a pass without music first, just to try and you get it. And then when you add the music, it's just icing on the cake rather than supporting all the things you couldn't make work in the edit. So I think it's part of that. I know when I met with Davi, we talked a lot about like 70s films. Like I'm really into American 70s, Altman, stuff like that. And so was she. And we just had this, I think a lot of times when I get a job is when you just start talking about films that you like. And if the showrunner likes the same films, it tends to work.
Yeah.
I think that's usually.
It's interesting to hear you say that you like putting together an edit without music first, because I'm doing a Sopranos rewatch right now, and the first time I watched it, I loved it. I mean, it's a great series, but it was so long ago. Like I wasn't even really working in the industry that much when I was watching it the first time. Watching it the second time, I'm going through the first few episodes of season 1 and I'm like, there's no music. Like it like just became clear. I'm like, oh my God, there is no score in this show. And I'm season 5 right now. There is just no score. There's obviously sound design and there's songs. The creators put music, like actual songs in there, but it's not a score. And I didn't really notice that the first time. And I think that is one of the many reasons, of course, acting and script writing and blah, blah, blah. But that is one of the reasons that make it feel so real. And I think the same is true for Mrs. America. Like you are so drawn into the dialogue and the acting when you're not being constantly told how to feel through music. It's a unique take. Now, I mean, I love shows and movies that are filled with score too. I mean, it is what it is. But there's something really pure about pulling that out. And I think that's just a really interesting point that you make, and a style that I think people don't necessarily recognize that. I think you always feel like you need to have a score.
Yeah. I think I don't have many rules, but one of my rules is don't score dialogue. Like if two people are talking, like let it, it's just gonna, I don't know. For me, that always ruins. And like The Sopranos, my favorite show of last year was The Deuce, which also has no score.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
It's but his use of source is incredible. So you still have songs, and you still have the emotions coming with these, there's stuff in bars and nightclubs and on the streets of New York City in the 70s. So there's tons of music, but there's no score. And I just think that's so I just love that, And I love these pretentious European films too, where it's just like dry through the whole thing. That's, those stuff that plays at Cannes. That's my favorite, it's just nothing at all. They're not going to give anything to you.
For the people that aren't familiar with Mrs. America, can you just sort of give us a little bit of synopsis of what the show is about?
Sure, yeah. It's basically about the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment, which would codify in the Constitution that women and men had the same rights, which is kind of shocking that we don't have that. So it was on its way to passing with flying colors. Even Republicans, everybody was passing it. And then this woman named Phyllis Schlafly who came out of the woodwork, and she had her she was kind of like Breitbart or something like that. She had her, maybe not as big, but she had her like mailing list. It was like the 70s version of that, where she'd have mailed stuff out of right-wing stuff. Came out to stop it, basically, and organized. And she's kind of responsible for organizing the religious right in the U.S. Because Jesse Helms makes an appearance, Dick Cheney, all these people. There's all these. That's one of my favorite things about it, is all these characters we know from now who just walking through. Roger Stone, Paul Manafort. So she kind of made it into, or was part of the reason why that became such a force in American politics, and then also had followed the feminists as well that were pushing against it.
Now, have you worked with the show's creator, Davi Waller, before? I don't know if I'm saying the last name right. So this is the first time.
Yeah, this is the first time. Yeah, I knew one of the writers. One of the writers is a friend of mine. But actually, he wasn't in the edit. So it was pretty much everybody that I worked with in the edit was new. But I don't know. We had, I liked them all. It was a nice. It was when we edited for so long. I think it was about 8 months or something like that. That it was kind of weird and then COVID stopped the edit. And we all separated. So it was kind of strange that we never really had a goodbye or anything like that. Now we're just zooming with each other.
What episode where in the process were you before COVID hit? Or I guess as COVID hit is better.
I think we had locked pick for everything. Except, I'm not sure about the finale. I'm not sure if 9 had a locked pick, but I did episode 6, and we had to do color and sound remotely for episode 6, 7, 8, and 9. And it didn't work too badly, actually. It was the mixing was fine. The color is a bit weird because everyone has different monitors, and you're judging off these different.
Yes.
It doesn't really make any sense. But also sound, I'm listening to it on my laptop. Someone's listening to it on headphones. But we got there, and I think they sound good, so I'm happy. We had very talented sound editor. We had Oliver Stone's sound editor and Quentin Tarantino's sound mixer, and so it was kind of a high bar already.
That's a really good point, because when people are working remotely, you have no control over what their monitors are, their audio monitors or their video monitors. It is what it is.
Yeah, there were a few surprises when I watched it on Hulu, but nothing terrible. I was just oh, that's a little different than what we heard, but.
I would love to know. Can you pinpoint something specifically that you saw and you were like, oh, I wasn't expecting that, or that's kind of an interesting thought to me, because you no longer have that central source for the way it sounds and the way it looks. It's now kind of it's not up to interpretation, but the comments are coming from people who are not looking at the same monitor as you.
Yeah. I don't think it was anything. It was not a very interesting story. I think it was just oh, that music was supposed to pump more. You know what I mean?
Okay. Just little details.
There's a line that we never heard. There's nothing.
There wasn't a Starbucks cup just hanging out on a table?
No. I kind of think we don't have any. I haven't spotted any mistakes like that. Someone told me the books in the background of Phyllis's shelf might have been the wrong year or something but I haven't noticed it. There's nothing like a Starbucks cup.
Do you ever get comments on your projects from, do angry fans email you as the editor for any project you worked on, complaining about some completely insignificant background nonsense that just irks them and they have to let you know?
Friends, not fans, too. I've had stuff too. I've done a lot of documentary, and I remember a friend of mine. And now that everything's streaming and you can pause and go back, you're doing driving shots, they're driving across the country to go somewhere else. And he's like, you passed that sign twice.
Oh my God.
Or you're going the wrong direction, somewhere, where he was from. So he realized right away. So there's stuff like that, but nothing. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's about it. It's mostly people telling me like my location stuff and documentaries are wrong.
I want to talk about the different types of projects you've worked on, because just in the past few years, Smilf, Russian Doll, Frontline, and Mrs. America. I mean, these are all very different types and styles, of editing. Yeah. And I think I love the fact
difficult people before that, which is like slapstick.
Yeah, I mean, so you're all over the map. You're everything from serious drama to comedy to documentary, and that's a little bit unusual. I think what you see more of is people just. I hate even to say pigeonhole, because I don't think it's that, but I think people develop an expertise in a certain category and then they just get a lot of work in that category. You've been able to sort of play with all sorts of genres, and I'd like to know a little bit more as to how you sort of crafted that in your career, and also what the benefits are to being able to play in so many playgrounds.
Well, I would definitely use the word pigeonhole, because I think that did happen to me at the beginning. What happened was I started as making like these kind of weird short films, which were kind of funny and like more art world stuff, like with grants and everything back in the late 90s, early 2000s, which kind of had so I had a little bit of a comic reputation from those. Then I moved to London in 2003, I think, and couldn't make any more of those, couldn't get a grant for the life of me, and started just editing on the side. And I just somehow fell into like these documentaries that were all just like, I just became like the depressing documentary guy, like children like being adopted and returned, soldiers with PTSD, ISIS, like just everything that was like big and depressing. But then someone in New York this showrunner remembered me that I had like this sort of a little bit of a comedy background. And he was the showrunner of Difficult People. So he wanted me to do it because he thought I could do comedy well. And I think it was when Hulu first started, and I think they actually pushed against hiring me. They're like, why do you want this guy with all this doc stuff? But then he stuck by me, and I think they were new enough. They were like, okay, whatever. And then it just took off. So then all of a sudden I had this dual track of like comedy in the US and serious doc in London. And it just kind of went from there. And then like I got to like Russian Doll and Smilf and stuff and Smilf is kind of that drama comedy thing. So I think that helps a little bit with me getting into drama more. So it was just kind of this amorphous, just spread out. And I just, and I think it's great because now that there's no scripted, I've gone back to, I've cut a Frontline, on COVID, of course, recently. And I'm doing another documentary now that's going to take me to the end of the summer. So it's kind of great that I had that as experience as well. So I can work. Well, everything's shut down.
I mean, I think the obvious benefits to doing a bunch of things is that you constantly are honing your skills. Anything else that you can think of that is maybe a not so obvious benefit of being able to do so many different styles?
It kind of keeps you, I don't know. I just like the way you bring one to the other. You know what I mean? Like when I'm cutting something about like ISIS kidnapping Yazidi women for being sex slaves, like I actually still look for the funny parts. You know what I mean? Not that there are a lot, but there'll be weird moments of like the sort of like Free Syrian Army, like or some to these rebels or something doing something really funny. And like, I don't know, I find those moments. And I think in comedy too, I can find the moments that are sensitive, and kind of make people a bit more, ground the characters and be closer to them, feel the realness. I think I know how to find out of that stuff too. So I think they feed each other. I think it's, it's great to do both in that way.
I'm sure there's a lot to this answer, and I don't mean to go down like a huge rabbit hole, but I am a little bit interested how would you describe what skills you need to be a good comedy editor? And then also apply that same question to a good, maybe dramatic editor or documentary editor. Like, what are the skills that you need?
I think out of comedy, drama, documentary, comedy, obviously timing is like by far the most important. And I remember it's Scott King, the guy who hired me for Hulu, and he brought me over to Smilf as well. I learned so much from him. He used to run Mad TV too. And like, he was just, telling me all these, like, don't cut on a joke, just all these, just like kind of simple comedy rules, which you can also break, or just picking up, taking out air and stuff to make stuff funny. I feel like, comedy is probably the most difficult out of them. Well, besides documentary, you need to know how to write a bit too, because you don't have a script. Sorry, go back.
No, stay on comedy, and I am interested. I want to talk about documentary too, but let's just stay on comedy for a second. You talking about obviously timing. You'd mentioned something about not cutting on the joke. What do you mean by that?
Like, I remember cutting something for Scott once, and it was like, there was something funny. I don't know. It's probably something like, I can't remember exactly what it was, but say somebody fell, and that was the joke of them tripping or falling over, something slapsticky kind of thing. And like, I cut right as they fall, because in like doc or drama, you would kind of cut on the movement to give it this thing. And he's like, no, don't do that. Let them do it. And it, and it's true. It's like, don't in the middle, or if someone's saying a line and the punch, let them say the whole line. Don't cut right before the punchline. You know what I mean? It kind of. And, obviously there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think he's right. I think there's something about just staying on them, to let them do the joke.
That makes sense, because the instinct is to cut, like in the case of the person falling, the instinct is to cut on the action. But the action, you need it to finish in order to really get the joke. That makes sense.
He's funny, yeah. So, yeah. I learned a lot. Scott is amazing. Scott King. He's like, I learned a lot from him, actually. I think out of editing with anybody, because he's really good with story too. So he can rearrange. Like, that was the thing. That was great with him. And what my doc helped too is like, sometimes difficult people, we would rearrange the scenes and almost like rewrite certain things if they weren't funny enough in the edit. And he's just great at like, put this here. And like, yeah, it's just, I think that opens your mind in comedy, of having that doc, openness to just move things around, because there were never any place in the first place, so you have the freedom just to move anything anywhere.
Did you ever watch Portlandia?
Oh yeah.
I really feel like Portlandia is like a masterclass in comedy editing. Like it's so crazy. It's the strangest editing pattern, and the rhythm is so weird, but it's hilarious every time. I honestly think the editing makes that show strong. It's a strong show. It's a funny show. But I think the editing makes some concepts that otherwise would just be like, turn into really hilarious pieces. Like that, to me, for some reason, is just such a bizarre. I don't know who is editing that show, but it is very strange and very funny.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. It's like editing is like, you can just kill comedy with editing way more than drama. I think you're leaning on the actors and the writers more. And in comedy, of course, they have to be a good comic and good jokes, but you can just kill it. If you don't time it right, you just it's not funny,
Let's apply the same question to documentary. What are the skills you need to have to be a great documentary editor?
I feel like definitely you have to understand narrative in writing, because you can just get all over the place, if you just start putting this in and that, it just can go off tangent so easily. And I think really having a focused straight line that goes through the doc, to find out what that is the most important thing. And find out how to make that straight line with the fewest words possible, in a way. Do you know what I mean? It's like this, I think you really have to just be very minimalist in the storytelling for that. So I think there's that, but I think also, but even for doc, comedy, and drama, I think you have to understand like other stuff. Like you have to understand writing for all of them. You kind of have to understand art for all of, like, what looks good. You know what I mean? What shot you're going to hang on because it's actually looks like a painting or something like that. I think you have to just get out of just your references and your inspirations being just film and TV. I think it has to be a bit holistic.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
This idea of being a writer or having writing experience when you're editing a documentary, it's interesting to me, because I've always really wondered when people are editing documentary, are you truly just handed a hard drive and they're like, here you go, make something out of it?
I have been. I definitely have been. I've been given a hard drive. Come back to me in 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. I've worked with other doc directors who want to be in the edit with you all day, every day. This guy named James Jones, I worked with a lot in London. He does a lot of great stuff. He's very much like, he wants to watch everything with you, like, But I've worked with other people who are literally just like, get back to me when you have a rough cut.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're pulling.
It's a lot of pressure.
You're making the story in those instances.
Yeah. A lot. I mean, not totally, because they filmed it and they picked the story. You know what I mean? And stuff.
Of course.
But yeah, you're definitely. Yeah.
In the case of Frontline, more of an episodic thing. Just to highlight that, because you've done a bunch of episodes for that show, and that show is fantastic.
Yeah.
In those cases, how does it usually work?
That Frontline's a little bit different than other docs, because there's usually a very quick turn. Like the last one I did, I think there were 4 editors on.
Wow.
Because they usually have, and they cut an hour. We did an hour in 4 weeks or something like that. Finished it in 4 weeks. So it's usually much more there. The directors are much more like, this is what we're doing, because there's really no time to waste. I've worked on a couple that are a bit more observational, docu verite feeling kind of thing. But they're usually very much like, this is what we're saying, this is what we're doing, and then you have room within that to sort of make it a bit more artistic and whatnot. But yeah, there's not a lot of let's explore and find the story kind of stuff with Frontline.
Yeah. Well, with that sort of deadline and timeline, I mean, how can it be? I mean, you can lose yourself in this footage for months.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. They do give you they're great with if something is going well, they do extend stuff and push stuff if they're like, oh, this is going to be great, because they appreciate craft there. You know what I mean? And they let it go. Like they let you go over. They're not like, okay, we're done, just get it on the air. They never do that. They're always like pushing for it to be the best. So
you can tell with the quality of the show. You can really tell. So that must be really fun for you, just loving documentary, working on a show like that.
It is. It's intense. I mean, the COVID thing I did, it was like, I'm sitting here, I was editing here. I think 2 people were editing in London, and then the producer was in Italy. It was just like, we were all over the place. But the whole thing was taking off. I'm hearing all the sirens outside and looking at all the duct toll. It was pretty intense to kind of work on that while shit was hitting the fan.
Now, this is the one, Inside Italy's COVID War was the title of it, right?
Yeah.
So I haven't seen that one, but I definitely going to, because I'm interested in the topic and it's a great show. But were you were you living in the US during this time, or was this also where you were in London?
Yeah, but I was in the US, but the Frontline thing kind of came from London, because they do a lot of co-productions with the BBC. So I was working on a BBC show there, and they did a co-pro with, and Frontline picked it up for the US. And so that's how I first started with them. So it's weirdly, Frontline has a lot of stuff. A lot of their international stuff is done out of London.
I'm just looking at the your IMDb for Frontline. Inside Italy's COVID War, Escaping ISIS, Syria's Second Front, Children of Aleppo, and Secret State of North Korea. I mean, you really run the gamut with your topics.
I know. It's kind of intense. The ISIS ones were really, watching ISIS videos of them decapitating people and stuff for days on end is probably not the healthiest thing for your head. So I actually stepped away from doc a little bit after that, because I was like, oh my God, give me Hulu. I mean, give me difficult people. I just want to do something funny and ridiculous.
I want to circle back to Mrs. America and let's walk me through kind of the way you prepare for a show like this. How does the process begin?
You mean prepare before I'm in the edit, or prepare with footage?
Just what is the process like when you begin the project, you're starting, this is your first day on the job. What does that first day look like?
I'm very much, I want to watch everything. You know what I mean? I'm very meticulous with notes. I watch every take with every angle, and I put and mark down which, things that I like, which I go back to later. And I'm like, why the hell did I mark that kind of thing? But I just want to watch everything first before I start cutting, and documentary as well. I do that. But Mrs. America it was pretty standard. It wasn't there was not a lot of improv. It was very scripted. The actors were all hitting their line. There wasn't a lot of fixing. You know what I mean? So it was kind of, or trying to make things work, because everyone was knew exactly what they were doing. So it was kind of great, because in that way you're already at this level, and all you have to do is bring it up to there, So it was a lot about acting, about finding performance and what, what tracks best with performance and stuff like that.
Did you get any notes from the director or showrunner about which takes they liked and wanted?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, there was a lot of, especially at the beginning, I think there was a lot of like, who are these? And I think that's with every show. It's a lot of like, who are these people? Who, how big? It's the whole grounded versus performative kind of thing. You know what I mean? Where you have to kind of find the right balance of it being, because like Tracy Ullman is hilarious and she can be really big, but sometimes you want to. But she gave it to us, so it was fine. Kate Blanchett, on the other hand, just is incredible, and she knows exactly what she's just like. Does the exact same performance every time, and like that's what she's like directing it herself.
Wow,
like, this is it. Boom. Julianne Moore was like that too. She did a guest appearance once on Difficult People. It was like every take she was like, she decided what she was doing and she did it. And like, okay. So
that must be kind of fun watching these actors give you varying performances. I mean, in cases when they don't, obviously too, but like just to see the ones that are too much, like going to these, classic, amazing actresses and being like, and looking at their performances and be like, no, I don't like that one. I like that one. I don't like that one.
It's kind of incredible. Yeah. You're kind of like, I don't know. Kate's not so good. I mean, I don't think I've ever said Kate's not so good in the scene with her. There actually really wasn't ever a, no, I don't like that one with her or with Tracy Ullman or Sarah Paulson, actually. They're such pros. With other stuff, there's definitely, other shows I've been on, there's definitely sometimes a lot of work to be done I think I talked to Davi about that a lot when I interviewed with her. It was about, I was like, half of editing is fixing acting. It can really be like trying to, not on Mrs. America.
That's right. Mrs. America was flawless from start to finish, every single performance. Okay, so you like to see everything. So you're ingesting footage, you're watching it all. Can you talk to me about the way that you work with your assistant editors and just to kind of set up your projects?
Well, Lily, this woman named Lily Janney, she was my assistant for Russian Doll and Mrs. America. And she's just like, she has like a history degree from Yale. So she's like super brilliant and she's just very meticulous, doesn't forget anything. And I forget everything. I'm completely absent-minded. So it's kind of amazing to work with her. So she scripts everything, puts in the script sync and everything like that. And sometimes she's assembled stuff for me. She's cut some stuff too now. So she's kind of a junior editor in other worlds. So I'm trying to think. And I also lean on her when I have a cut done. Like the first person I ask to watch it is Lily. I have her come in the room and be like, "What do you think?" Because I totally trust her to see, and she'll remember. She has remember something that like I forgot about, or and she's seen all the takes more meticulously than I have because she's logged them all too. She's like, "Oh, what about this?" So I mean, it's great when you have an assistant like that. That you can. I've had other assistants where it's just like they just do the stuff, hand it to you, and like maybe you don't. Maybe you don't really have the same taste about things. So, but it's when you have one that you have the same taste with and you trust, it's like incredible. Bad news is like she'll probably move on and become an editor soon. So I'll have to find another one.
That's what happens. What is their assistant editor responsible for?
Logging all the footage, making sure all the takes are labeled correctly, doing the script. So when you script sync, so when you click on the line, it goes to the different takes, exporting outputs. Lily also, she's good at After Effects. So she'll do, if we need little small After Effects fixes and stuff, I think that's a good, assistant editors have to, if they do After Effects, they'll work all the time. And then she does sound work for me too, like finding sound effects and building some background stuff. Yeah.
We have a question from Twitter from Jaden Marvel, wants to know, what is a scene in this series that you're particularly proud of and how did you cut it?
I think in episode 8, when Sarah Paulson's character Alice takes the Christian pill and is drunk.
You got an Emmy consideration for that one.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But that was amazing to cut. It was like, and the director is this woman named Junixa Bravo, who had this film Zola at Sundance last year, who's an amazing director. Her stuff is always just a little bit. She did the Juneteenth episode for Atlanta also. So her stuff, she's always like the one to do the artsy ones, I think. So it was just working with her and getting the scene without it trying to be too trippy and being like, oh my God, I'm on acid kind of thing. And having just really be with her what it feels like to be on some weird pill for the first time in like enemy territory, and also be intrigued by it all too. So I think that was my favorite because you could do anything too with it. You could move the scenes. Like there was it wasn't narrative. So like you could move the cuts around, you could put weird jump cuts in, you could play with the sound, which I love to do a lot. I think that was definitely my favorite.
Can you describe the scene and describe the decisions that you made to make it what it is?
So Sarah Paulson's character is she's a like Christian-y, anti-ERA person, and she meets a woman at the bar who gives her a pill to take, to make her feel better. And so she takes it because she calls it a Christian pill. And then slowly it's just like, we never really say what the pill is, but it's obviously affecting her strongly. So she kind of it sort of overwhelms her. And she walks through this like women's conference where there's like a lesbian therapy scream session or like a kung fu, like a women's self-defense thing. And, abortion, people talking about abortion. And so it's her walking through this world while fucked up on drugs for the first time, basically. It was trying to get, and she's kind of intrigued by it all. She kind of it kind of awakens her. So that's, yeah.
So you need to basically create this experience for her in the edit.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about some of the decisions that were made and why?
Yeah. A lot of it was, like I said, we didn't want to put effects in to make it like, oh, here's a bunch of trails, you know what I mean, to make it look like that. You wanted to be with her a bit. You didn't want to just make it about the editing. You kind of wanted to stay with her on this journey. So we did a lot with sound. It was kind of taking out certain sounds, putting in certain sounds. Like all of a sudden we have like in the Walla, like some people speaking Polish or something. You know what I mean? It was just kind of make things off a little bit. Or there'd be a jump cut that's kind of not a flashy one though. One that's just like, oh, this something just shifted a bit. And not letting scenes complete. I think it was also like really cutting into the scene. So it was like So it was kind of like these glimpses of reality. You know what I mean? That she's going through.
What do those types of decisions do for the audience? Like those odd jump cuts and sounds that aren't supposed to be there. Like how are audiences affected by those decisions?
I think you just clue that, like I said, we didn't want them to be very flashy, and I don't think they are. It's not like whiz bang kind of weirdo stuff. It was, you just want it to be off. You don't want them to stay with the character and to be off. So they know something is, so they go with the character like something's wrong, or different or changed, and not without like we were talking about with music before, without leading them by the nose. I think it's just to really get the audience to feel a little bit keep the show and make it still be part of the show, but like the floor is kind of pulled out, the rug's pulled out from under you a little bit.
And I think also that this particular scene is a departure from the pace and the style of the show already. By design, it has to be. But can you talk to me about the pace and the style that you've sort of created in the edit? I mean, that's a decision that definitely comes through editing, is how is the series paced out? What's the feel of it? Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it, those types of decisions I think come obviously from the director and the showrunner too, but those are things that you feel because of edit decisions. And I'd like to talk to you about that. Like how would you describe the pace of Mrs. America and how did you achieve it?
I think since the actors were so top notch, it was kind of, the pace could be of editing, not really the pace of the show, but the pace of the cuts. If that makes sense. You could stay on them longer. You know what I mean? It's like you can stay on Cate Blanchett's face for 5 minutes. I mean, where there's that one shot in episode 6 where she's in the confessional, just one shot of her for 2.5 minutes talking to a priest. So I think when you have actors like that, it's great. Like the pace can slow down because you're still engaged without trying to, manufacture something. I think you can always tell not always, I think people lean on it otherwise, but like when things are really quickly cut, a lot of times it's because there's problems, I think, with story or acting and you've been moving stuff around. So I think that with Mrs. America, we could be a little bit leisurely with and let performances play out and stay in 2 shots of just 2 people talking to each other, for a long time. That said, there's quite a bit of comedy in it as well. So there was opportunity to sort of like do a little, more comic style editing where it's a bit punchier,
I love scenes that just sort of linger on the actor.
Yeah.
And
that was like one of I was gonna say one of my favorite things in the thing is when Elizabeth Banks' character and Cate Blanchett are sitting at the bar in 6, and they're talking about like American defense policy for like 5 minutes or something. It's something insane. It's like, but the actors are so good in the writing, that like you can just sit, you're like totally engaged. I think that's what I loved about this show is like you could just sit with them and really just make it feel real.
Yeah, it allows you to. I don't know. I mean, the performance obviously has to be there, or else there's no engagement at all. But
no.
But the decision to end the scene or to cut that shot does need to be made. And how are you like? What are the things that you're looking for? Are you just really hypersensitive to boredom? Like, do you just are you always thinking like, is the audience bored here? Am I bored here? Like, how do you make that decision that the shot is done?
I'm not sure if boredom's one of my big priorities that I think about consciously. I think it's just if it has. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like one of those things I can't really put into words. It's just kind of ingrained in like, does this have a rhythm? Does it work? Like my mom is a musician, so I think maybe I have some sort of rhythmic quality in me, even though I don't play anything anymore. But I think there's something about that where I know I just have an instinct for me, I think, of when to do stuff. But speaking of boredom too, when Alice is on the phone with her mom, right after she first takes that Christian pill, do you remember that shot? It's like this really long shot of her like reading a recipe. I was a little bit worried about that at the beginning because I was like, oh, is that going to be too boring? Because she's just talking about a recipe and breaking down. And Janixa was like, no, it's great that it's boring. It's like, this is what's going to clue. I thought it was such a genius thing. And I'll always remember this. Like, this is what's going to clue the audience in that like something's like, why are they sitting on this shot for way too long? And it's a way to sort of do that. And I'm so glad. I mean, she only shot that one shot, so there was no cutaways anyways. There's no options, which is genius of her. But it was like, it was great. So sometimes boredom you can put to, you can make work to your advantage.
A little while ago, we were talking about you making decisions on which takes you're going to use. And obviously, I mean, we know that the director also makes decisions, and everybody, I'm sure, is giving their opinions. But what is something that you look for when you're choosing between takes?
Oh, God. I mean, that's a huge question.
Yeah.
It all depends on the character and the story. You know what I mean? I guess it has to fit the character is the most. It depends. I'm thinking about like Russian Doll and like our first pass at that. We sort of had 2 versions of the pilots. One with Natasha Lyonne being really like Natasha Lyonne and, like really big and kind of boisterous, like the way people love her for. And then we tried one like, maybe we'll do one toned down and stuff like that because people are like always worried about being grounded. And I think usually going grounded is a thing, but with that, it was like, no, it's like, let's give them Natasha Lyonne. You know what I mean? That's what they came here for. And she's so good at it. So I think it's like also it's just what's right for the person. You know what I mean? I don't think it's never the same thing. Whereas like with other people, other actors, like you always want to go for the grounded one. You don't want to go for them going too big, That's interesting. So your decisions are being based on, you're essentially creating these characters, or not creating them, but you know what I mean. You're building these characters, and then your decisions are made based on, is this a realistic performance for this character in this moment of the story? Yeah, and it's not. None of these decisions are in isolation. You know what I mean? It's like there's so many. Like, what is coming after it? What is coming before it? What is the music? What's playing in the background? There's so many. So that's why I think it's just there's never an answer for why you're choosing one thing because there's like 8 other variables you're trying to match as well.
We had the editor for, or one of the editors for RuPaul's Drag Race a few episodes ago. Yeah. Her name was Molly Shock. And part of what we talked about a lot of is collaborating with other editors because she had to make decisions in her, episode based on things that she hadn't even seen yet. Because if she was doing episode, 1, 3, 5, and, 9, whatever, she's not seeing the other episodes and she's making decisions without necessarily knowing what was going on prior. Do you run into situations like that on a show like Mrs. America if you're collaborating with other editors? Or do you really need to be linear in the way that you edit this? Because like you just said, every decision is based on where we are in the story.
Yeah. No, we were definitely, like, we would screen for each other with the other editors all the time. Like it was so, even on like an editor's, like an early rough cut or anything, it was just to see what was going on. And there was a few times, I remember there were a few times I changed some performances, like saying like, oh, in episode 7, her performance was like this. So episode 6 is a little bit too similar. So I went back and changed some things. So yeah, we were very collaborative in watching each other's stuff. You kind of had to be.
How many people edited this show?
3. Yeah.
And were you, which episodes were you responsible for?
I did 3. I was going to do 3, 6, and 9, and then something with the schedule change where I had to shoot 9 before 8. So I ended up doing 8. So 3, 6, and 8. And I'm kind of glad I got 8 because it was the special episode.
Exactly. And, like, do you have to lobby for particular episodes? Do you look at the scripts and you think, all right, I want this one, I want that one? Like, how does that work?
I really wanted to do the finale. And I remember when it just wasn't going to work, timing wise, like the execs called me and they were like, I'm sorry, and it was the, cause you're kind of like, you always want to do the pilot or the finale. But then sometimes, I did an interview a couple of weeks ago and the guy was like, no, the penultimate episode is always the best episode. And I think it was for Mrs. America. I mean, it was just like, it was a great thing to do because they brought Janixa in and it was just like there was no men in it. It was just like it had so many original things to it that and Sarah Paulson is in every single scene.
Wow! So
it was kind of great to do something like that where it's completely different. And you do you can lobby for episodes, but sometimes there's schedules and you just things happen.
The reality hits. In our last few minutes, I want to talk about kind of the end stages of any editing project and any project, I guess, in total. Talk to me about your relationship with the colorist, sound mixer. Like, what happens when you're essentially done and then you sort of hand your baby off to the next steps?
I'm really into the color, but I try and stay out of it because the DP is usually there and there's like all these cooks in the kitchen with it. And it's kind of like, I don't know. It's not that, like, the battle that I always fight for is sound. Like, that's so important. It's half the show. So it's so important to me. And I do a lot of sound work when I send it to them and I'm quite particular and stuff. I had an amazing relationship with the sound people on Mrs. America. Scott Gershon, like I said, he's like Oliver Stone's guy or stuff like that. Yeah. And he's just so talented, you know what I mean? And I'd build these whole entire scenes and he's like, why don't we just take all the sound out? And I was like, oh, that's kind of, and it works so well. You know what I mean? Usually it's time, whether you can be there for all the mixes and playbacks and stuff like that. It's like whether you've gone to another job or not. And luckily this one, there was time. So I was really involved with it and very happy with what they did. It was great. Yeah.
In your experience, have the sound mixers and colorists sort of taken your cues, or do they usually strip it all away of everything that you've done and put their own spin on it?
I think the traditional way is to do that, strip everything away and put their own thing in. But now editors, I think over the past 5 years or so, editors have been doing so much more sound work themselves. And because the network kind of expects a sound design a bit when they get the cut, they give notes on sound. Now, you know what I mean? Where before they'd be like, oh, that'll be in the mix. But now, like, they give notes to the edit about sound. So you have to be a decent sound editor. So now people are so attached to what you did that actually they don't strip it out as completely as much as they used to. You know what I mean? It's like they kind of keep a lot of the ones that you'd like, oh, I like the sound of the fire in that. I like that door slam in that. They kind of, we've been doing more sound editing, I think, as editors than we used to. Yeah.
And I want to end our conversation with maybe some advice for editors out there that are listening to the show that would love to be in your position and wondering, how the hell do I get there? Like, what can an editor do? I mean, obviously production is crazy right now. Hasn't even really begun anywhere. And if so, I mean, I know commercial work's happening, but very limited. And I don't think anything's going on with, TV shows and movies yet.
No.
So editing is kind of the last and only field that can stay alive right now because people can do it from home. What do you say to these people that are at home, they love editing, and they're trying to make this their career?
I think you mean like how should they do it now, or what?
Advice for them. I mean, I'm saying in the context of now, meaning people have more time generally. Right. They're home. They're honing their skills in editing. And what do you say to those editors that that really want to make this their career? Where do they go? How does it start?
I think. Weirdly, I would say don't focus on editing so much. Like it's, go to look at art, let's watch films from other countries or old films or read books. You know what I mean? Understand all this other stuff. Learn about acting. I think once you learn all that other stuff you can have so many people can learn that program and gets their own kind of whatever style, I guess. But then it's the bigger decisions that what's this show about? What's this, that I think really will put you over the top is when you can have this dialogue about acting or about filmmaking from the past with these showrunners. I think or writing and what works narratively. I think, honing those skills is just as important as learning how to use them properly.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I think a lot of people think of editing as more of a utilitarian, I put this clip in front of that clip, when it really is the art of storytelling.
Yeah, there's so much more to, and music too. Understanding music, you know what I mean, and rhythm and stuff like that. I think is another. There's a lot of aspects to it other than just knowing the equipment.
Well, the show is called Mrs. America. It's on FX, and all episodes are streaming now. Todd Downing, ACE, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experiences.
Thank you. It's been great.
I want to thank Todd Downing for coming on the Go Creative Show and sharing his experiences editing Mrs. America on FX right now. So you should check it out for yourself. Of course, I want to thank our behind-the-scenes team that make the show happen. Matt Russell, who mixes and masters and makes the show sound so good. You can find him at gainstructure.com and on Twitter @gainstructure. And of course, our producer, Connor Crosby, you can find him at ignitionvisuals.com and on social, Ignition Visuals. And of course, follow me at Ben Consoli to see everything that I'm doing behind the scenes and all of my remote production that I've been doing lately. So there's a lot there. People have been interested in what I'm doing there. And our sponsor, MZ, Education for Creatives. Check them out at gocreativeshow.com/MZ. And all things Go Creative Show, of course, are at gocreativeshow.com. You could subscribe to us there. You could follow our social media and make sure that you never miss an episode. So we'll see you next week on another episode of Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.